All right, so on to problem 4. So with problem 4, we're dealing with an interface, and we haven't seen much on interfaces in programs we've written in the past. So we're definitely going to have to take a look at what's going on here, because this is kind of interesting. So we have this interface called number group. And it has a method called contains that we need to make sure that we reflect. Contains is important because it's going to return either true or false. And its parameter is going to be a value of type int. So we're going to have to write the interface. Remember that an interface looks very similar to a class. As a matter of fact, it's very similar to an abstract class in that our method header is not going to have code because we don't know how to determine if it contains something. Our method header is just going to have the header with a semicolon after it. So for our interface, we're going to have public interface number group. And then inside here, it's just going to be one line of code. We're going to have public Boolean contains with one parameter int value. And a semicolon at the end because this is going to be an abstract method that we're talking about. This is going to have to be implemented by any class that implements the interface number group. And this is probably 2 points here. So a point for declaring our interface and a point for writing our abstract method header. Which leads us to part B, where we're actually going to implement this contains. So if we're implementing contains, then we're going to kind of make sure that we have to write that method. So here we're writing a range class, and this range class is going to implement our interface that we just wrote. So we're going to have public class range implements number group. Now I'm looking at this and I'm noticing that a range has a low value and a high value that are set by the constructor. And I don't see anything in this paragraph that says that they're going to change, so I'm not going to create a accessor or a modifier for these values. But I do need to have instance variables, so I'm going to have private int low and high. And then I'm going to need a constructor, because obviously the constructor talks about these. So public range, and we're going to have int low and int high. Excuse me, no, do not put semicolon there. That is a bad thing to do. So inside my constructor, I'm just going to say that low gets low and high gets high. So just setting up my constructor there. So now I need to write a contains method. So public Boolean contains, and I'm going to have some int value that we're going to have to make sure that we contain. Now this time I don't get to leave it as an abstract. I actually have to write the code for this, and I want to return if the value that we're checking, if this number falls in this range. In other words, is it less than or equal, is it greater than or equal to the low? Is it less than or equal to the high? So I'm going to return value is greater than or equal to low and value is less than or equal to high. Again, using the low and high instance variables that I had here, making sure not to say LOW the way I did for my parameter for my constructor. So we're probably looking at about 4 points for this. 1 point for the class header, including the implements. That's going to be the most important part there. 1 point to make sure that we have private instance variables. Public instance variables just are a no-no. 1 point for a constructor that sets both of our instance variables using the parameters listed. And then 1 point for correctly following the implementation of number group. In other words, writing a method called contains that returns a Boolean with a parameter of integer. So 4 points looking at for this free response question. And on to our last part. So part C of number 4. So scrolling down. So we have this multiple groups, which is going to call upon a array list of number group objects. And we're going to get each of these number group objects out. We're going to ask if they contain a particular value, and it's going to return true if it's contained in one or more of these. So in other words, we're kind of assuming it's false unless one of them comes up true. And that's going to be important to think about when we're going through this. So in this particular example, if it contains a 2, 2 is not in the range of 5 to 8, 2 is not in the range 10 through 12, but 2 is in the range of 1 through 6, so we get a true out of it. If I check 9, it's not in this 5 to 8 range, it's not in the 10 to 12 range, it's not in the 1 to 6 range, so I'm going to say false. If I'm looking at 6, it is in this 5 to 8 range, so I don't need to check any of the other ranges, it's true. And so the idea is that I'm going to go through this list, and as soon as I find one that works, I'm going to return true, and if I find one that doesn't work, then I'm going to return false. So here's our contains method that we're writing for this class, and so what we're going to do is go through each of the elements in that group list. So in our code, I'm going to go ahead and say Boolean return gets false, because false is kind of my default state. I'm assuming I'm not going to find anything that matches, and only if I find something that matches, then go ahead and return true. And I'm going to go through each of those number groups. So for, and I'm going to have number group G in group list. So I'm using a for each loop, and all I want to know is if G dot contains val, or num I should say, then my return value is going to be set to true. And then I will just return ret when I'm done with that. Now the thing is, because these are all number groups, I know that every number group has a method called contains that has a number integer as a parameter. And again, I'm doing what I usually do. I know that I'm going to be returning a Boolean, so I declare a Boolean and I make sure that I return it. A lot of people will just go ahead and do it this way. They'll just say return true and then return false and kind of get rid of that line, and that's perfectly acceptable. Just having the for loop, the if loop, and then 2 return statements, that's going to work fine. So probably looking at this for our remaining 3 points, 1 point looking at going through every element of the group list, 1 point for successfully calling on contains if it does contain, and 1 point for returning false if it's nowhere to be found in our loop.